Oh, hello. You know, on this channel, I think it's about time that we take a break from pursuing all those pixels and instead start pursuing the art of the written word. So, welcome to Pixels Book Club, where we're going to be talking about everything that I've been reading recently, and I also want you to comment down below letting me know what you've been reading too, whether it be comics, manga, regular books, or anything else. And to start this video, and indeed this series, we're going to be talking about the first thing that I was reading recently, which was actually this comic called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Last Ronin. I was actually quite a big fan of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles growing up, but not the 80s cartoon as most people are familiar with, but instead the 2003 cartoon, which was actually quite a lot darker in tone. As I got older though, I eventually kinda just stopped watching it, and then the newer series seemed a little bit too childish for my tastes. Up until recently, I had never really thought about doing any research into the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics, which turns out was a mistake because they're actually really good. I originally learnt about The Last Ronin through the Cinemassacre podcast, where somebody mentioned it in I think episode 1, and the concept just sounded so amazing that I had to get it and read it for myself. Basically, this comic is set way off in the future, where 3 of the 4 turtles have actually been killed by the Shredder's grandson, and the 4th remaining turtle goes on a suicide mission in order to eliminate the Shredder's grandson. One of the interesting things in issue 1 is working out who the last remaining turtle is, because he wears a black bandana and uses all 4 of the turtle's weapons. So, to begin with, it's a little bit ambiguous as to who it actually is. By the end of the issue, you do get a definitive answer as to who it is though, and it is possible to work it out throughout the comic too, if you're familiar with the Turtle universe. Now, I actually ended up liking this comic so much that I actually got all 3 of the other ones too. The 5th one is due for release early next year, and that'll be the last one, and I can't wait to see how they finish this story. Now, after reading all 4 of these, I was interested to do some research into the main series of Turtle comics to see if they were any good. But it turns out that the actual Turtles comics are a little bit confusing to get into, as is the case with a lot of comics really. But basically it boils down to this. There's the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comics, which actually started the entire franchise, and these are referred to as the Mirage comics. Then the other main iteration, and the one that I'm most interested in because it's the most recent and it's actually still ongoing, is the IDW comics. Now, the thing that's great about the IDW comics is that they've all been reprinted into these massive hardbook volumes which contain multiple issues and are also in chronological order as well, which make them really easy to get into. Plus, because they're so thick and because they're also hardbacks as well, they make really good display pieces, especially if you've got a lot of them. They've all actually got different coloured spines, so they end up looking really good when they're put next to each other. So at the moment, I've got 3 of these massive hardcover volumes, and I can't wait to start reading the 4th one, because the 3rd volume in particular was really good. I think one of the things that's so good about the IDW Turtles is that not only is it quite dark, being much darker than even the darkest version of them from the cartoons, but also it takes parts of all of the different iterations of the Turtles and merges them all into one continuity, which I've really been enjoying. Pretty much every single Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle character is a part of this universe, and there's also some brand new ones too, which are really good, with a particular favourite of mine being Old Hob, the cat. So yeah, these comics have pretty much reignited my love of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which isn't really something I expected them to do, but that's how good they are. Now, to wrap up this Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle section, I will mention one more comic that I got just because I thought it sounded interesting, which is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Deviations comic. The Deviations comics was a line of 5 or so comics that was spread over the course of a month. One of them was about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which is this one. There was another one about Ghostbusters, another one about Transformers, and a couple of other ones. So to sum up what the Deviations comics are, they basically went back to one of the pivotal moments from the main comics, so in this case Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and does like a sort of what-if scenario that could have happened. So this one is set during a story arc called Cityfall, where Leonardo becomes evil and starts working for the Shredder. But this Deviations comic basically spins that and makes it so that all 4 of the turtles become evil instead of just Leonardo. Although this comic is good, it is also very, very short, just being a standard comic length. And I don't really feel like that gives it enough time to breathe and fully expand on the concepts that it presents. So really, I would only recommend that you get this if you've been really enjoying the actual comics. So after I went down this rabbit hole reading all of these different Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics, it got me thinking that I've never really gotten into a comic series before, and maybe I should give one a go that I've not read yet. Now, it just so happened that I already owned a comic book spin-off of a series that I'm very into. So the thing that I read after the Turtles comics was actually the first Bloodborne comic. Now, I would imagine that a lot of people don't even know about these Bloodborne comics, and I'm pretty sure that they're actually canon to the overall story as well, so that makes them even more interesting to read through. I think there's 4 or so more outside of this one that were released afterwards, so it must have been pretty popular to have warranted having more published. The thing that I like about this comic in particular is that it takes the kind of ambiguous story of Bloodborne and translates it really well into a different format. Even though there is quite a lot of spoken dialogue in this, I still feel like the story is down to interpretation and you could take it in several directions based on the ending. Now, with this particular comic, which is called The Death of Sleep, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you read this if you're not already familiar with the Bloodborne story, because if you didn't already know what happened in the game, you'd probably be really lost with this. But if you are a fan of Bloodborne, then definitely give this a read if you can, because it is some good supplementary material. The next 2 books I read are actually ones that I've been meaning to read for ages, and I got them quite a long time ago. And they are the Junji Ito short stories collections, Shiver and Smashed. Now, the thing is with these particular books is that because they're short story compilations and the short stories within them were written at vastly different times, a lot of them can be a bit hit and miss. The weaker stories contained within them are really nothing to write home about, but the stories that are good are really good and make the whole collection worth reading. I think my favourite story of the whole bunch is called The Long Dream, which is in the Shiver book. And the concept behind this one is that there's this guy who comes into hospital and he's having these dreams that get longer and longer. Now, it's not that he's actually asleep for longer, but his concept of time when he's dreaming is getting longer and longer. So at first it only feels like he's in the dream for a day, but then it gets to a point where he's in the dream for a week, and it gets worse and worse up until the point where he's in the dream for what feels like a lifetime. There's something about that concept that I just find really quite scary, and what happens in the story is pulled off really well as well. Of course, there are other stories in these 2 books that are really good as well, but nothing quite compares to that one in my opinion. My favourite short story from Smashed has to be Earthbound, which is where people randomly seem to be getting stuck to the floor in these mysterious poses, and they refuse to talk or do anything about it, and seemingly can't move. It gets to a point where loads of people across Japan just suddenly stop moving and stop interacting with people, and are just there, stood in place, not doing anything about the situation. The main character's motives are to explain what's actually going on here and work out what's happening to these people, and the payoff at the end is pretty good. Admittedly, this one isn't as good as The Long Dream, and if you could only get one of these books, I would definitely say that Shiver is the overall better one. But they're both good reads, especially if you're a fan of Junji Ito. The final book that I've been reading recently is probably one that you're familiar with already based on how popular the anime is, but it's Death Note, with this particular version being the Black Edition, Volume 1. I'm pretty sure that the only real differences between the Black Edition and the regular editions is that this one has slightly better translation and that it's 2 volumes in one. But beyond that, I think they're exactly the same. I primarily just opted to get the black edition because they seem to be easier to get hold of, and obviously there's less of them as well, with them having 2 issues in one. Now, most of you, if not all of you, probably already know the concept behind Death Note and have probably watched the anime, with it being potentially one of the most popular anime ever made. But for those of you that might not know what it is, it's basically about a high school student who finds a mysterious Death Note, and when he writes the names of people in that note, they will die. By using the Death Note, the high school student sort of sees himself as becoming a god and using it to make the world a better place by ridding it of criminals and other bad people. But obviously by doing this, he himself becomes a serial killer and is hunted down by the police. At the start of the story, the police really have no idea what's going on, but there's a character called L who's introduced, who's a world-renowned detective who's famed for solving cases like this before. So the story basically then becomes about L trying to catch this crazed serial killer before the serial killer can kill him. It's a really, really good concept, and it's so well executed. There's a lot more going on than what I've just explained, but that's basically the gist. Now, the anime adaptation of Death Note is my favourite anime ever made, so obviously I'm going to be interested in reading the original manga. I've only currently read this one because I want to buy all of the others before reading them so I can just do it in one binge session, but from what I've read so far, there are actually a couple of differences between the anime and the manga. The most notable difference so far, which I enjoyed, was that the person who's using the Death Note actually seemed a little bit more reluctant in the manga and sort of regretted their actions a little bit more and was questioning themselves a bit more. But other than that and a few other really minor differences, the anime seems to follow the manga really, really well. But I'm definitely going to continue reading this because I want to see if there's any more differences between the 2 versions. But yeah, I think that about wraps up everything that I've been reading recently. Like I said at the top of the video, definitely let me know what you've been reading, and let me know if there's anything similar to these things that I've mentioned that you think I should be reading too. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to see more stuff like this coming soon, and I'll see you next time. Bye!